Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I have some free time, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's revisit an ink today. Kind of. So one of my most hated ink reviews that I've ever made, barring my less than glowing review of Konpeki, is Visconti Blue. Now, when I was given Visconti Blue, I was given it in cartridges, and they come in these fun little things, and then I think you get 7, and they've got these handy little, blue dots in the back. I tend to label my cartridges, but, yeah, so I tested the Visconti Blue that I got in cartridges, which I didn't really know at the time. Several Visconti inks in cartridges are essentially fundamentally different than their bottle companions, I guess. So when I tested this, I was expecting, Visconti Blue kind of has a bit of a legend to it. You know, it's known for being rich and intense and all this stuff, and the cartridges really weren't. So that felt like a huge letdown to me. And yeah. And people kept telling me, your review is wrong, your review is terrible, it's not right, take it back. And so finally I got some Visconti Blue sample. Obviously this would be from a bottle, and I could tell as soon as I did a little swabby at the top and did the thingy for, my swatches, I could tell that this was going to be vastly different. And so today I'm going to re-review Visconti Blue, but I feel like this is the real Visconti Blue, because this stuff, it's awful. I stand by my old review of this stuff, which I've actually included in the tests, which is why we have 3 pens here today. So in this, which is a pen and ink sketch with a broad nib, and it tends to be slightly dry writing, I put Visconti Blue Cartridge in here. And then in these 2 pens, I didn't even use this sample because my parents recently went to the Netherlands, and my dad bought a bottle of Visconti Blue because he was fascinated by the way it looked, despite the fact that I have actually made a point of never buying Visconti in a bottle because it's obnoxious to use, and I was right. But the ink is great. The bottle setup is terrible. It's pretty, but that's about it. Anyway, so the 2 pens I used were these. This is an Italic Parsons Essential, and it has a Medium-Cursive-Italic-Stub, and pretty much all of my Italix pens run dry, quite dry. And in fact, the more you use it, the drier it gets. So the fact that this ink is a little bit wet from the bottle was pretty handy. I needed that. And then lastly, I also used this Lamy Safari with a broad nib, and this broad nib is actually fairly wet, so we're really getting a range here today. But yeah, so I just want to show you a few comparisons. Hang on. Alright, so here is Visconti Blue from the bottle that my parents got me. Here's Visconti Blue from the sample vial. And I did a bunch of tests, and they are the same. But here's Visconti Blue from cartridges. Yeah, see what I mean about fundamentally different? Yeah, so mostly what I'm going to be comparing here, even though I included cartridges in all the tests, is really the real McCoy Visconti Blue. So firstly, I've got Private Reserve American Blue, which is quite similar, if a bit lighter. Sort of the medium bits through here looks quite like the light bits through there. Next up, I have KWZ of Poland's Azure number 5, which I think is maybe just a little bit more, I don't know, purpley, maybe, and a little darker. Next up is Diamine's 150th Anniversary Blue Velvet, which is quite similar, and in fact I just finished testing this afternoon. It was strikingly how similar these 2 were in experience. And lastly is DC Super Show Blue, which in color I think is quite similar overall. There just aren't as many darker patches on this swatch. The main difference being this one did not sheen nearly as much. So there we go. Now, bear with me while I zoom in. Okay, now for fun I thought I'd do the comparisons between the cartridge and the bottle, because again, there really is a fundamental difference in these inks. Now, these two on the left are the cartridge, and the furthest left is the one that I let dry. And these two more on the right are the ones that I got from the bottle, and this one center right is the one that I let dry from the bottle. Now, the cartridge, as you can tell, is much more of a light blue. It's sort of a dusty blue. It's not nearly as saturated, but you can tell where the initial drop was put, and then it's almost even all the way throughout. And the one that I let dry, the dot is a good bit darker, and the stuff going up is lighter, and actually there was this point of separation where the water kept going up further and the ink stopped that we didn't really have with this. Now, bottled version, honestly, I just want to bring this in more to focus because there's actually a good bit of purple in this ink, but it's right under this almost turquoise blue. So what you get is purple. It's very, very solid purple. You can see where the initial drop was put. This isn't completely water soluble, we're not going to have a big blank space because it is heavily saturated. And I know I'm not going to get this on camera, I know it already, but right along here, at the very edge right here, we have red sheen. So this is so heavily saturated that even though the water pushed it up, when it all gathered at where the water stopped, it was so densely packed together that there is red sheen. Now, the one that I let dry, the dot is much more significant. We get less of a distinct separation of purple and then blue. Here it's sort of purple and then it sort of gets contaminated with a bit of blue. And then the light blue up at the top is, again, more separated from the purple. But, yeah. So, there's that. Now, my so-called chemical tests. Again, this one on the left here, that is the cartridge. And again, you can tell it's just phenomenally lighter. Water really broke it up. 1/3 bleach solution. It sort of turned the page sort of that pithy kind of lemon skin yellowy kind of thing. Ammonia pen flush got it moving, but not as much as water. And hydrogen peroxide turned it this weird sickly green, which I don't know if the camera's going to show, but yeah. And the bottled version, water got it moving, but there's so much in this ink, like it is so heavily saturated that when water got it moving, it just sort of pushed it around and made a mess. The 1/3 bleach solution actually turned it this light shade of blue before obliterating it. And ammonia pen flush started to break it up, but it also started to break up the paper, and I had to sop it up quickly. Same with hydrogen peroxide, so... Yep, so there's that. Paper test. Top-down density, Clairefontaine, 90 grams per square meter. Yeah, so this... this ink in the cartridge, so yeah, here we can see the bits that are, you can tell just by looking at it. I don't even feel like I really need to draw the eye because there's just such a difference in the color and just the experience of it. Now that broad pen and ink sketch that the cartridge is in is a slightly dry writing broad, and then the ink flow for those cartridges was actually kind of dry. In fact, it was a 4.5 dryness and a 4.5 dryness pen. So occasionally I would have to like open up the back of the pen and like squeeze the cartridge a little bit just because it kind of didn't want to go. But yeah, the bottled version, it is everything that I was told that this ink should be. It is deep, rich, intense, it is vibrant. There is a ton of red sheen. I really hope this shows up on camera because it is just everywhere, especially with that broad Lamy Safari, which is already wet. But yeah. So that medium cursive italic stub is already dry writing, and it kind of needed the 6 out of 10 wetness of the bottled ink to like get going, but even still, it is just a dry writing pen. So it took 8 seconds to dry, again, because the stub is acting like a squeegee. It's leaving a very dry line in the downstroke. That wet broad on Clairefontaine with a wet flowing ink that's heavily saturated, yeah, it took 32 seconds. Really not shocked. The cartridge took 24. I have no explanation. But yeah, all throughout this, there is no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, but there is plenty of sheen. And this water test, now these top two, those are the bottle, and you can see that it seriously dyed the page up there. And the broad, more remains because more was put down, just more ink was getting put on the page. And so you can see those dots, you can see the writing of it better. But that, yeah, the cartridge, it's really pretty gone. So, next up is Fabriano Aqua. It's an 85 gram per square meter paper. I love this stuff. The more I use it, the more I enjoy it. And we kind of see more of the same. Like the two bottled inks, it is an intense blue, it is a vibrant blue, it is eye-catching, it is the opposite of dull. And there's plenty of red sheen, and actually there's a bit of like a hazy red sheen in the cartridges. It's just a little harder to see. But yeah, that medium cursive italic stub took 11 seconds. The wet flowing broad took 31. The cartridges took 18. But all throughout, yeah, there's feathering, or not feathering, there's shading. I was going to say you can particularly see it in feathering. But there is no bleed, there is no feather, there is no spread, there is no echo. And again, I feel like we can really see where the bottled ink in this water test, it really dyed the page. And again, the broad, more remains, you can tell with the dots, just because more was put down. The cartridge is pretty gone. Now, next up is Rhodia, 80 grams per square meter. Yeah, it's kind of more of the same, you know. We still have like intense color. We still have, come on, camera, can't you just get this on today? Come on. Ugh. But yeah, there's a distinct halo, especially in the broad, wet Lamy. There's this like outline, this red halo of sheen all around the writing. But yeah, anyways, that fairly dry writing medium cursive italic stub took 9 seconds. The broad, wet Lamy took 33, and the cartridge took 15. And I just want to show you in that cartridge, it looks undersaturated. I mean, here you can see all the lines of the quadrilateral paper. You can see it even through the densest parts of the scrubby. It wasn't quite as noticeable here on the Fabriano, but you can see it. For me, that's kind of, that more often than not, that's a deal breaker. I don't like that. I can't. But yeah, again, there's great shading all throughout, even in the cartridge. But the problem is it's undersaturated, so a lot of times in that cartridge where there is shading, it sort of draws the eye to the fact that it is undersaturated. But yeah, no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, plenty of sheen. Water test. Again, the cartridge is largely gone. But what I thought was interesting, in Rhodia, it didn't dye the page very much, because when I soft up the water, it sort of took the ink with it. But again, that broad wet Lamy, it was putting down more ink, and so more remained. You can tell which lines were done with the broad too, because you can see the end strokes and the dots. It's, yeah. Now, next up is Tomoe River paper, which is known for drawing out shading and sheen and dry times and echo. And yeah, we got that pretty much across the board. And I really hope this shows up on camera, because, yep, okay. Yep. Okay, look at 48 seconds to dry. Do you see that halo of sheen? It is literally like that all throughout, and actually it's like that on the Fabriano, the Rodya, and whatever. In the Lamy, it's so much harder to get on camera with those papers. I don't know why. And then I hope this shows up. Okay. Yeah, the bottled stuff is kind of upstaging it, so it's almost hard to see, but there is this hazy red sheen in the bottom cartridge, but it's nowhere near as much as this, and since the color isn't nearly as bright or as vibrant, I mean, this stuff almost looks ridiculous on the same page as this. It's just, it's embarrassing itself here. But yeah, so because of the way this paper works and the way it makes ink pool, because it's slower drying with something really wet like the Lamy, it takes so long to dry, it kind of lets the ink evenly distribute itself throughout, you know, a letter. So it's actually harder to see shading there. It's almost easier to see in this really dry writing stub, where the edge of the stub is sort of pulling the ink around. But, and again, we have shading and a halo effect even in the cartridges, but it sort of draws the eye to it being undersaturated. And I hope you'll take my word for it, it would draw the eye to its undersaturation, even if it weren't closely juxtaposed to this intense blue ink. But yeah, anyway, so the dry writing cursive italic, medium cursive italic stub took 14 seconds. The wet flowing broad Lamy took 48. and the cartridge took 28. So yeah, but again, this is a wet flowing ink and a wet flowing pen. It's intensely saturated. It's Tomoe River. 48 doesn't shock me. Would I like it to be better? Yes, but you know, I'd also like to end world hunger. You know, like of course I'd like it to be better. Who's like, I think this could be worse. Let's do that. No. Anyways. Ugh. Yeah, as I say here, there's no bleed, no feather, no spread. There is just sheen all over the place. It's almost like, if you're epileptic, be careful with this, because it's just going to be flashing light at you all over the place. But, yeah, there is some echo, especially in that broad, because it's putting down a lot of ink. So if you're using a broad wet pen on super thin paper, because this is a rich, dark royal blue, and where it's laid on thick, it can get kind of dark. So there, if you're super sensitive to echo like I am, keep an eye on it. It would not necessarily be comfortable for me, especially where those scrubbies are. But yeah. Again, water test. Yeah, at this point, we're on the 4th paper. I've had to prime the feed for the medium cursive italic stub a couple of times, just because it's so dry writing. And still, it's just not putting down enough ink to like really remain. That broad, which is already wet flowing, is putting down plenty of ink, and again, you can tell which ones are which. Yeah, and what I think is interesting is, so the lines from the cartridge, there was one that went right there, and there was one that went down here. And they are gone. And these dots down here are utterly gone, and this writing is utterly gone. So whatever that cartridge is full of, it's not good at resisting. Now for the next 3 tests, I just used the medium cursive italic stub because it's so dry writing and it is a finer nib. I thought it'd be more fair on the more economical papers. And I also used the cartridge because, again, I wanted to maintain a sort of comparison all throughout. But yeah, so here is the world's worst 20-pound copier paper. This is the stuff I've been using for probably almost a year now. It is terrible. This stuff is utter garbage. I can pretty much guarantee you have something, if not a step above this, then several. However, I'm going to bring this in. Now, there might be a little woolliness, but I really don't see any feathering. And when I was reading over these notes again before I started recording, I was like, that can't be right. And I sat here looking at this, trying to find legitimate feathering. And since I hate feathering, I usually come down on it pretty hard. But here, no, not so much. And granted, here in the cartridge, and again, you can tell which one's the cartridge, you do retain some shading, but it looks undersaturated, and I hope you'll believe me that you can see that it looks dusty and thin and undersaturated, even when it isn't directly alongside this intensely saturated other ink. But yeah. So, anyways, the dry writing medium cursive italic stub took 1 second. The cartridge took 2.5, which I really don't understand, but there you go. Now, what's interesting is if I turn this over, so this is the cartridge right here. You can see that there are little dots of bleed. And this is the cartridge right here. You can tell that there are little dots of bleed. But this line right here, that is the bottled ink. And this line right here, that is the bottled ink. And it's actually doing a bit better. And I think it might be because just this medium cursive italic stub is infuriatingly dry writing. But again, it is a stub, so it is having that almost like squeegee action where the edge of the stub is sort of leaving a very thin line of ink. But yeah. But yeah, so there's no feathering. There's not a lot of bleed. There is some show through, and if you'll notice, like if I leave the paper here, you can see that a lot of what's nearly bleeding is, first of all, along this edge, and then more towards the top here. So I think this is the edge of the paper, the edge of the piece of paper. So it's reacting environmentally. It's essentially aged badly. Now, water test. This is a more absorbent paper. It tends to draw the ink in, make it harder to wash out. And it kind of did, and it kind of didn't. Now, I really wish there was a way I could show you just how much this paper was affected by water. It has completely reshaped itself. But anyways, the cartridge, yes, a little remains, but really not much. But here in the bottled, I really hope this comes through. What you see at the center, can you see how that's purple? And the light blue is washing off? Yeah. But what's interesting is that blue is freaking out. The blue that's trying to wash away from that bottled stuff. It's trying to get away, but the stuff at the center is very clear, very there. It's fairly dark. In fact, it's still darker than the cartridge stuff. So, honestly, if you had to recover that, the bottled stuff, I think you probably could. Now, next up is Mead Notebook Paper. This stuff is very common for school children in the United States. This is the kind you find in a spiral notebook, not the kind you find in a lab notebook. And lately, this stuff has been feathering like crazy. But the thing is, it hasn't as much as I thought, and where it did, it only did it in places, and I can't explain why. So up here with the 5 boxing, we're going to get feathers. There is feathering. But then we come down to jump quickly, and there's none. And I can't really explain it. And then down here with the swirly hoopies, there's really no feathering either. But then we get to this, and there is. And I don't know. Still. So there is some feathering, but I don't know. Now, the very dry writing Medium-Cursive-Italic-Stub took 1.5 seconds. The cartridge took 5 seconds to dry, which on a paper this absorbent, I really didn't understand. But now this paper is physically thinner than 20 pound, so I'm not shocked that we would have some show through, just because, I mean, this is a richly, intensely saturated ink from the bottle, and so it doesn't shock me that we'd be able to see what's coming through the back. However, this right here, that is from the stub, and I think I was beginning to scratch through the page, because you can see how, for the most part, it's not really coming through. And then here, it did. And then again, here, it did, because I was starting to scratch through the paper. So overall, it's actually done pretty well. Can you see something on the other side from the back? Yes, but not because it's nearly coming out the back, just because it's so thin. This paper is so thin. Now again, this is one of those more absorbent papers, so it didn't really want to let go of the ink. However, here we do see that this paper can freak out when you add water. That blue is just absolutely it's like tie-dye. However, you can see again, the purple at center is pretty clear, pretty there, pretty stoic. But what's interesting is the cartridge is actually also pretty there. Didn't freak out, didn't feather, didn't explode. So either one of them, if you had to recover it, I think you probably could. Now, lastly is Moleskine notebook paper, which I hate because it's terrible. It's just terrible paper. That's it, full stop, period. Yeah, so the Medium-Cursive-Italic-Stub took 4 seconds. The cartridge took 6. And yes, in the cartridge we still have some shading, but it's not good shading. It draws the eye to how undersaturated this ink looks. It's really not looking good. And we do have feathering, and we have like this woolliness and mild feathering throughout. It's not really attractive. It's not great. It could be worse, but it's not great. And then the thing is, on here, yeah, the bottled stuff was bleeding way more than the cartridge. So this is bottled, this is cartridge. This is bottled, this is cartridge. This is cartridge, this is bottle. Yeah, so I don't know, whatever makes this bottled ink wetter flowing, more saturated, whatever, it's the paper can't handle it. And then for once, we see this paper, or this ink actually freaking out when you add water, because the blue is freaking out yet like before, but the purple at the center is also trying to let go. It's also trying to, it's like half feathering, half getting extra woolly. The cartridge, the same. It's like half of it decided to stay, half of it decided to go, and we just get this sort of woolly mess. But yeah, so anyways, there you go. There's me setting the record straight. I am both admitting that I was wrong and that I was totally legit right. Because I'm sorry. This is the ink that I reviewed. This is the ink that I was promised. How was I supposed to know that the cartridges are a completely different set of ink? Never mind. Anyways, I stand by my review of the cartridge ink. The bottled ink, yeah, it's pretty much what I was promised. It's intense, It's intense color, it's richly saturated, it's got this red sheen just like everywhere, it's slightly wet, it's reliable. It did better than I thought on some of the economical papers. It looked beautiful, absolutely beautiful on premium paper. I'm thinking of siphoning it out of this annoying bottle and putting it in an old private reserve bottle because I can't stand that thing. But yeah, it's a great ink. Quite enjoyed it. For your consideration from the Triple N Network. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Bye.